Welcome to the Betterment Lectures. My name is Dr. Doreen Miners, and if there is one thing I've learned in my time as a brain scientist, it is that there is no instruction manual for this device in our head. But there are patterns of thought, patterns of feeling, patterns of action, because that's what brains do. Create patterns that gracefully handle the predictable shapes of everyday life. So let me teach you about them. One pattern, one podcast, and you see if it works for you. Now, the last couple of episodes, I've been pulling things apart, tearing down science, talking about how science becomes this sort of ritualistic practice and the failings that delivers to us as a result. Or talking about our strangely quixotic relationship to doctors and why fake news about medicine is so popular in our media, because we trust doctors in the same way that people trust other kinds of gurus like astrologers or yogis. And I don't think we realize this as a culture, so it causes us problems sometimes. Takedowns of various well-being programs, polyvagal theory and positive intelligence. A lot of takedowns, and I do takedowns because they frankly make my podcast more popular, but also because it annoys me. However, I can't just take everything down all the time. I do have to sometimes talk about what works. So that's what I want to do today. I want to talk about a thing that works. In particular, I want to talk about meditation. I've had a lot of clients over the years that have wanted me to help them get into meditation. And here at the military academy, I have cadets who ask me whether they should be getting into meditation. And I can only conclude from that it's still very trendy, although I honestly would have thought the trend would have died off a little bit by now. The thing about meditation that's different from other health trends is that it works. Most of the time, it does a pretty good job at reducing people's stress, helping people feel calmer throughout the day, helping people be more focused. It works most of the time, but not all of the time. And I mean, you might have experienced this yourself if you have meditated. Times where after meditating, you got up worse than when you sat down, with your head louder, not quieter. You were more wound up or anxious. You came away from it thinking that you're bad at meditation, because it's not supposed to do that to you. And the reality is probably you weren't bad at it, because for a fair few people, sitting down to meditate is actually the problem, not the fix to their anxiety. And I don't think that this is very well talked about. And before I came to Sandhurst, before I did any kind of consulting work or coaching work, in the clinical stuff that I did, I would find myself often sitting across from people who have been told over and over again that they should be meditating, and finding out that that was actually the thing making them worse. The thing hurting them is the thing prescribed to fix them. So, meditation, that's what I want to talk about. Let's get into it. You honestly can't take a breath without coming across meditation, it seems like. And maybe this is just an artifact of me researching for this lecture, but 30 seconds into anybody's guide to a better life, you'll find some exhortation to get into meditation. It is on the NHS, that kind of level of infrastructure. It's in schools, it's in universities. It's, I myself have put it into corporate wellness decks. Whatever's wrong with you, someone's first answer is going to be, have you tried meditating? And the pitch is always the same. I wish I had gotten into it sooner. Nothing does quite for me what meditation does. It's good for everyone and can be done in 5 minutes before going out to work or whatever. And the worst case is that you've just sat for 5 minutes and nothing bad happened. All upside, no downside. And to be fair, for a large proportion of people, it works. And I guess the point of this lecture is to say I think it could work for all people if we were a little bit clearer about what meditation is. And I think for that we probably have to go a little bit back to where the current trend of meditation entered or got injected into our sort of cultural milieu. So you have this molecular biologist, John Kabat-Zinn, who was working in the University of Massachusetts Medical School in the late 70s. And like many molecular biologists, one of my own mentors included, he was interested in medicine. And in particular, he was interested in chronic illness and chronic pain, realizing that treatment wasn't really helping people with these chronic illnesses or chronic painful experiences move forward. He wanted to help them change the nature of their relationship to the pain, to the chronic illness. And so as something of a yogi himself, he takes this hodgepodge of sort of imported Asian contemplative practices and turns it into a fairly rigorous program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. Its final form looks like 8 weeks of learning how to do a meditative process called body scanning, where you sort of pay attention to the body, top to bottom, sitting meditations, a bit of mindful movement, the end result of which is that people come away more effective at managing their stress and improving their quality of life. Now, Kabat-Zinn's program got so popular within clinical circles for reducing people's negative psychological outcomes that it ended up populating a lot of clinical programming. A lot of people wanted to adopt mindfulness and mindfulness-based meditative practices, helped by the fact that we were looking at the peak of what's known as the cognitive revolution in psychology, where we were moving away from concentrating on people's behaviors and trying to concentrate on the thinking that might have led to the behaviors in the first place, which might sound a little trivial to you. Of course, there's thinking and behavior, and we need to concentrate on both. But really, up until the 60s, we were only concentrating on behaviors in the main. So this new emphasis on thinking and Kabat-Zinn's program of mindfulness meditation, where you are working directly with what's going on in the mind, really went together quite well. And the end result of this marriage and proliferation is these two sort of corpuses of meditative practices that people use a lot in clinical context and outside of clinical context, one of which is called mindfulness, the classic one. You sort of let the thoughts go by without trying to grab them. You think of meditations where you imagine your thoughts as leaves floating down a river or clouds in a sky. You notice them. You just don't let yourself get carried off by them. You're sort of sitting outside watching. And then there's also concentrative meditation, which is trying to achieve the same effect but from the other direction. Rather than zooming out and allowing your thoughts to pass by in front of you uninterrupted, instead you try and focus your concentration on one thing, a breath, a mantra, the flame of a candle, something like this. And in doing so, you sort of begin to shut everything else out. Two different roads, very similar place. The idea is that you're not getting yanked around by your own mind anymore. In the mindfulness tradition, by becoming more aware of our thoughts and emotions and letting them, or practicing, allowing them to flow past us without getting swept up with them, we are less influenced by them. Or in the concentrative tradition, by learning to exclude these things more intentionally, we're similarly less likely to be influenced by them. But either way, we probably get more of a chance to manage them. And the upshot really is, on average, better emotional regulation and anything that emotional regulation touches. So stress or focus, your work, your relationships with the people around you, all of these things seem to pick up because your emotional regulation is better. So that's the good side of meditation and the reason why it's so popular. It came up in clinical circles Everybody noticed that this seemed to be a pretty good thing, and it spread from there. The bad side of meditation, though, is not as talked about. So let's spend a bit of time on that. Following the huge wave of trendiness around mindfulness-based stress reduction and its peers really penetrating the clinical surface of psychology, certainly by the late 90s and early 2000s, a few people started to voice some concerns about the widespread nature and incautious prescription of meditation to people. And I think these concerns are best described in a book called The Buddha Pill by Miguel Farias and Catherine Wikholm, but they really are a reflection of some of the stirrings in the clinical world at the time. They make this observation that they were selling meditation as this way for people to get calmer and to become happier. But what they noticed was that meditation wasn't really built for that purpose. And I'll quote them, "The fact that meditation was primarily designed not to make us happier, but to destroy our sense of individual self, who we feel and think we are most of the time, is often overlooked." So that's the quote. You see, what they're saying is that what's now stock standard as a recommendation for how to become less stressed makes you less stressed by making you less yourself, by taking yourself apart. And obviously the people practicing it aren't using it in that truly self-destructive way, but it's kind of like getting a sledgehammer and using it to hammer in a tiny nail, right? The tool just wasn't built quite to do the job that you're using it for. And there's going to be some downstream consequences of this. Again, in the book, you have a nice quote. "Its primary purpose was much more radical, to rupture your idea of who you are, to shake to the core your sense of self so that you realize that there is nothing there." So in that quote, what they're referring to is this idea that, at least in some Buddhist traditions that were inherited as part of Kabat-Zinn's agglomeration of Eastern methods, that they believe in no core concept of self, that we are an accumulation of experiences that feels like a self, but underneath there is nothing, kind of like a candle. You know, you can light one candle with another candle and the flame remains the same, but the candle changes. That's one of the classic ways that this view on consciousness and on the self is described to people. So meditation, in the form that it was injected into our culture, was designed to do something a bit more substantive than reduce our stress. And I would suspect that Kabat-Zinn knew this because his program was designed for people with chronic pain, chronic illness, people who had no other solution to the problem they were facing and needed something radical and substantive to change their relationship with this chronic problem of theirs. But I equally suspect that the people who are recommending it as part of their guide to the well-lived life do not acknowledge or deal with the more powerful end states that this tradition is centered around achieving. So I want to give you a couple of examples of what can go wrong when you have this misalignment between, what those practices, the meditation traditions we've adopted from are trying to achieve and what we are trying to achieve with it. And the first one is the kind of idea that meditation cannot do you harm, that meditation only ever can be beneficial or neutral. The worst thing that you can do is sit in silence for 5 minutes is part of the sales pitch for many of these courses. But sitting in silence with nothing but your own mind to keep you company is not a neutral act. You think about, for example, how many of us cope when life is unpleasant. We try and make ourselves busy. We try and fill the day. And there's a reason for that, because if you took all of that distraction away, you're going to have to sit with the unpleasantness. And sitting with unpleasantness doesn't necessarily make you calm, right? It is, in many cases, the busyness itself that's what's keeping us together. And you can make it really tangible if you think about people who suffer from, for example, post-traumatic stress, right? If your primary problem is involuntarily relieving some kind of terrible event in your mind, in your body, then sitting and reflecting on your mind and your body seems like it might induce some kinds of problems. And indeed, there is research that indicates that it is a problem for exactly this kind of population. And sitting with only ourselves provides all sorts of opportunities for disturbing thoughts to arise, intrusive thoughts, and telling yourself that you're going to let them float down the river or scud along the sky is all well and good. But if you can't manage to drown these thoughts out or let them pass, then you might actually end up with harmful outcomes from meditating. And since I wrote the article that informed this podcast, there's been some more literature on this. So this 2025 paper, around 6 in 10 meditators reported at least one bad effect, and about a third recording something that actually distressed them, and about 10% recorded that these things were something that actually got in the way of their day. And this is a kind of standard pattern that you see. About a quarter of meditators are going to report unpleasant experiences in the course of meditating. And importantly, these are regular meditators, not beginners, right? So these are people who know how to do the practice and still have distressing content come up. So it's not just about learning to do it properly. And that is sharpened again if you think about clinical populations. There's an entire literature that describes adverse events that hit clinical criteria: anxiety as a result of meditation, depersonalization, mania, and in the worst case, psychoses. I'll link to some of the articles that talk about this in the show notes, but it makes sense if sitting quietly with your mind is the problem you're trying to solve, then sitting quietly with your mind might induce that very problem. So meditation isn't for everyone, not in the lazy way it's normally marketed. It's not going to be a cure-all. You're not going to get the same outcomes across different people if you don't consider what kinds of things might be affecting and therefore effective for those people. It absolutely does seem to reduce stress and distress in a lot of circumstances, but there's a reason it was introduced as something to help maintain themselves in the face of something that was untreatable and not something that was treatment in and of itself. Meditation is, I guess at its core, a tool that we can use to explore ourselves, having a look inside ourselves. It's not necessarily a tool for changing ourselves. In isolation, it doesn't give us any guidance for what to do once we've noticed all this stuff going on in our mind. And if we don't know what to do with all this stuff, then there's every chance that it might go in a worse direction than a better one. Well, not every chance, a 1 in 4 chance, something like that. And I guess that's the main point I want to make, is that meditation isn't a solution to a problem. Meditation is a way of exploring yourself in order to discover that solution. It's not a treatment. It's a tool for getting to know our mind so that we can change our relationship with it. And I think that a better way to think about meditation comes if we zoom out from the classic interpretation of what it is, this tradition that drives back to Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction course for people with chronic illness, and just think about what sits at the core of meditation at a practice. So let's talk about that and how I think that can help us use meditation a little bit more effectively. And then I'll let you go. I mentioned before that you sort of end up with these two categories of meditation. Concentrative meditation, where your goal is to kind of exclude the thoughts from your mind, curtail the impact of the environment on our thoughts. So using a mantra that you repeat in your mind, or concentrating on an image or a flame or a sound or your breath, your heartbeat, these kinds of things, crowding out the thoughts, And then you also have the mindfulness meditation, which is letting our thoughts and memories pass through our mind without getting a response for us. Like, again, leaves in the river, clouds in the sky, observing them, trying not to get attached to them, trying not to judge them, just to become more aware of what is floating through our minds at any given period of time. You're not being driven by these thoughts, you're just aware of them, I suppose. Now, one of the benefits of concentrative meditation over mindfulness meditation is in that exclusive property. Crowding out the thoughts might be the solution to having distressing thoughts crop up and not knowing what to do with them. Now, there is some debate around these things. Concentrating on a mantra or your breath sits in the same category as letting the leaves of your thoughts float down the river, which sits in the same category as focusing on a metronome or a candle flame. It makes you sort of wonder what meditation is other than just focusing on something, right? Sort of relaxed attentiveness, training your attention, putting your awareness somewhere on purpose so that you're not being run by the noise, the chatter in your mind. You've made a decision about where that mind is going to sit relative to the noise. And a good example of this is something that is actually in Kabat-Zinn's original program, which is movement. And this is now called movement meditation or dynamic meditation, practices that intertwine physical activity and mindfulness. So you might think of yoga or Tai Chi, which emphasize concentrating on the position and movement of the body. Classic dynamic meditative styles. But also, if you have started to approach the age of 30 or found yourself on the other side of it, you might have discovered just how many people around you are running, going for half marathons, ultra marathons. This is another form of dynamic or movement meditation. Walking and running, just like yoga and Tai Chi, give the restless mind a job to do, to concentrate on the physical activity that you're doing. And for people who can't sit still with themselves, people who would struggle to pay attention to their heartbeat or pay attention to the content of the thoughts floating down the river, these things can be very effective at achieving that same end, placing your attention, your awareness somewhere deliberately relative to all the noise that normally drives you. And there's a reason that so many people describe cleaning as one of the activities that they do that de-stresses them. Right? These things all seem to me like acts of meditation. Sadly, there's less evidence about these more movement-oriented practices, as you would expect. The literature is still well-grounded and revolving around that original mindfulness-based stress reduction program. So one of the things I can't really offer here is somewhere for you to go and learn more about this kind of meditation, a specific program or a specific technique. But what I can do is point out one of the important cores that is missed when people try and move from an internal meditative practice to an external one. And that is something about intention. Remember that meditation is about learning more about how our mind and body work in order to change our relationship with it. In mindfulness-based stress reduction, this comes almost for free because you're paying attention to the content of your thoughts as a part of the practice that you're doing, either because you are watching them float down the river or you're working to actively exclude them. If you're going to do something like clean the house or go for a run to try and achieve the same effect, that'll work, but you need to not just concentrate on what your body's doing, but concentrate on what the rest of your mind and body are doing too. The difference between cleaning the house and meditating is the intention you go into the process holding. Because once you're done cleaning the house, you've actually got to get up and do something with the way that your mind and body responded to the cleaning, with whatever you noticed in that process. If you do that, I suspect you'll be more or less as well off as you would if you took any influencer's advice to just incorporate meditation in your life. If you're feeling the pressure from your media streams to add meditation to your pile, you can do whatever it is that works to concentrate your mind and exclude the thoughts, or help you identify them and let them pass non-judgmentally, with whatever physical activity you would like to inject in to help you become more robust to the distressing features of it. But in all of the cases, it is a technique for paying attention to what's going on in your mind and body. It's not a treatment in and of itself. Whether you're sitting down for a session of mindfulness meditation or going to do a salsa class, the intention is the thing that you've got to pay attention to, and what you do with that information when you walk out. So that's it. Meditation. I'll leave it there.